So I'm Michael Jackson. This is my friend Ryan Florence. We are React Training. We've been doing this now for a couple of years. We'll tell you more about React Training maybe later. Probably some of the things you might know us for is our work in open source. We've done a lot of work in open source, specifically in the React community. For the last couple of years, we've been working on a piece of software called React Router, and a few other pieces of software here and there, CDNs, various React components, doing React trainings and things like that. So we've done quite a few things. I just wanted to kind of get to know you all just a little bit.
Not too much.
Yeah, no, not like peanut butter and jelly, like know you. I just want to, kind of know a little bit about you. How many people here have never actually used React, but they've kind of maybe played around with it a little bit, maybe kind of just barely familiar with it? It's cool. We meet people like that every single day. Cool. How many people have actually written React at work, and maybe not shipped something in production, but at least you're using it at work? Cool, cool, cool. And how many people are like, yeah, I could probably be up there on stage right now, doing what you're doing. I've shipped that much React, shipped it to prod, I'm a pro, right? Okay, we got a good handful of people. Good, cool, cool. So it looks like we're mostly talking to kind of the working kind of, we use React on a daily basis. We develop a lot of stuff in React. So I say that we've been working on this router. Let me back up just a little bit and just kind of tell you a little bit about my experience personally. So back in 2012, just 4 years ago, which is like a millennium in internet years, I was working at Twitter.com. And I was working on our ads platform. And does anybody remember new Twitter? Not new Twitter. It was new, just one new Twitter. Back in 2012, it had this crazy thing that slid out from the side. You would click on a tweet, it slid out and showed you all the details of that tweet. We were really, really proud of that interface. And why? It was because the whole thing was rendered on the client side, right? This was just 4 years ago, but that was actually really, really novel for people to do all of the rendering in the browser, right? And you had people like Jeremy Ashkenas, inventor of Backbone, and he was like, I just ship an empty body tag. That's so cool, right? You just put an empty body, and people are like, what are you talking about? An empty body tag? Oh yeah, just render everything in JavaScript. So cool. Right? Here we are 4 years later, and we're like, oh yeah, it's pretty common. I think Create React App does that. Lots of people do that. But back then, it actually wasn't that common, and we used this tool called Mustache to do it. Anybody used Mustache in here? Mustache.js? Yeah. So at that time, 4 years ago again, 2012, we were using Mustache to render Twitter.com. And it was crazy, crazy, crazy slow. It was basically just a big pile of regular expressions, and we go and parse your Mustache template, and we'd interpolate some stuff, and then we'd
Sorry, you don't know what's going on back there.
Oh, the Mustache.
No,
we have great docs. So this is Mustache. This is the project, and it was kind of my job to dig in and figure out why is this so slow. So in the process, I actually ended up completely rewriting this thing from scratch.
Michael Jackson, rest in peace.
That's kind of how I felt. That's kind of how I felt when I was
this is killing me.
I was like, I'm dead. So that's me. So we rewrote Mustache. We gave it a proper, tokenizer and a parser and a Mustache AST and all of that stuff for people who parsing and writing language grammars and things like that. But it was still not the best experience for us. It was still kind of slow. And what always bothered me is every time I felt like we were doing a bunch of work that we didn't really need to be doing all the time. And let me kind of explain what I mean by that. If you've used Mustache, you might have used a template like this, right? So if your view is person false, and then your template looks like this, you've got a $person, and then this closing tag with a /person, and person is falsy, well then you'll never actually get that text, right? So what are we reinventing there? It's like a conditional, right? It's an if statement, basically, right? If person, then show this stuff, and that's it, right? So we were inventing, an if statement, basically, in our templating language. Say you had an array of stuff. I actually thought of this one. I'm very proud of myself. I almost used the Three Musketeers, but then I decided on the Three Stooges. Anyway, say I've got an array of stuff, and I want to, display a list of all those names. Well, we can reuse that same syntax, and now, since that thing is an array, we'll just repeat the stuff inside 3 times, or basically how many items are in the array. What are we inventing here? Yeah, iteration, right? Loops. This is a basic loop, or like a map function, right? Yeah, Musketeers. Oh, I did use the Musketeers. Forgot about that. Go down a little bit. Okay, this one's interesting. No, up a little bit, sorry. So this one, in this one, I want to actually, I want to just say name in the loop. Okay, so I'm looping over all of the Beatles, and I want to just say name in the loop. And I want those objects to actually, concat the first name and the last name. What am I inventing here?
Mapping? Reduce?
Yeah, I'm inventing basically like a functional transformation, a basic functional transformation, right? I have 2 values, like concatenation. I have 2 values, I'm going to pass them to a function, and they're going to be concatenated together, and then they're going to return, and so now I have 1 value, right? So I'm inventing a transformation of data, or basically like calling a function in a template in this static language, right? And this language that we were inventing kind of kept evolving, right? If you used Mustache for a long time, you'll know that you can do lots of different stuff. You can do like filtering and you can do, of course, loops that we've already talked about, mapping and things. And every time we would introduce a new feature, every time that somebody couldn't do something, it always kind of bothered me in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, I just want to build Twitter, right? I just want to build this website, but now I have to add features to this templating thing so that I can build a website, right? Well, what do we call code that describes, or sorry, I gave it away. What do we call text that describes a program? We call it code, right? It is a programming language, right? Essentially, that's what we were writing when we were writing Mustache. We were writing a programming language. We were inventing if statements. We were inventing, loops, conditionals, iterators. We were inventing functional transformations, right? Filters, things like that. Things that if I were still in JavaScript, I could probably just use array maps, and I could use if statements and things like that. I had a friend at the time, actually, who was doing Scala. And he's like, he goes, in Scala, if you want to build an XML document, any Java people in here? We've got to have some Java people, yeah. He goes, in Scala, if you want to build an XML document, they actually have this XML primitive, right? Because they're doing XML all day long, right? That's their bread and butter. In Java land, that's how you exchange data. It's like JSON for JavaScript programmers, right? So he's like, they're doing XML all day long. They actually have a primitive in the language for XML. So you can really easily compose and XML documents, and you can pass them to another process, and it can parse them really easily. It's like numbers and strings to them. It's like something that they deal with all the time. So it's very, very common. And the more I started thinking about it, the more I thought, well, isn't that kind of like what these DOM documents are in JavaScript, right? This is something that we're building all the time. When we're using jQuery, we're manipulating these things all the time. We're grabbing a bag of elements and animating them, and then we're creating a bunch more elements and appending them here and removing them there and adding class names and removing them. We're dealing with these things all the time. It's our bread and butter. So why don't we actually have syntax in JavaScript for representing UI elements? Fast forward a couple of years. So I was thinking this. I had no idea how to do it. Fast forward a couple of years, JSX comes out. And at the very first, JSConf EU, when they first talked about React, and they put some JSX up on the slide, and I think a couple of people threw up in their mouths, kind of like, oh, what is this XML doing in my JavaScript, right? When I first saw it, I was like, yes, that's it, right? That's what I was doing when I was writing this Mustache stuff, is I was inventing a programming language. I didn't want to put the imperative code into the declarative. right? I didn't want to take my logic and like invent this new templating language and try and put if statements and while loops into this string templating language. Instead, what I wanted little bits of that string scattered throughout my real programming language, which was JavaScript, right? I wanted to take the procedural code and I wanted to wrap that sort of declarative code in that procedural code, in that JavaScript code. So if that kind of makes any kind of sense, I was fighting. Okay, I was fighting with JavaScript, and then React was like, no, let's invert that paradigm, and now we're going to use JavaScript. Now we're just going with the flow, and it feels great. Fast forward a couple years, so Ryan and I, about 2 years ago, we were learning React. We were like, hey, you know, you've dealt with a lot of UI problems. I've dealt with a lot of problems in my career building UI stuff. This React thing, and at the time, honestly, I think probably Netflix was like the only company that was using it. I think probably Ben Alpert was using it at Khan Academy.
And Netflix.
There weren't very many people at the time that were actually using React. They were actually into React. I think most people had kind of written it off like, this is this
Another weird Facebook thing.
Weird Facebook thing with like XML tags in the JavaScript and whatever. But for some reason, we decided to give it a shake. And we actually
I was asked to speak about it at JSConf.
Ah, that's right.
So I was like, okay.
They asked Ryan to give a talk about it. So Ryan you were originally planning on giving a talk on a couple of other frameworks.
Angular bone.
And then they're like, throw in Polymer and throw in React and
Angular actimer bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of kept growing.
After like an hour with React, I was like, oh crap. We just switched to Ember like 8 months ago, and everybody already hates me.
How am I going to sell this?
Yeah, how am I going to sell this? What I didn't know is it sold itself, so it worked out great.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
No problem. So, so you get this talk. He's like, I got to use this React thing.
Yeah, and we didn't. I looked around for routers, and there were no.
Exactly.
Like nothing that Ember's router is awesome. Like so many great ideas came out of that. A great API, and I was like, we need a router if I'm going to try to sell this to my team.
Totally.
So I wrote like 100 lines of code in like a couple of hours, and then sent a little message to Michael. I'm like, hey, look at this thing.
Check it out.
Yeah.
So I had actually hired Ryan at that time to help me with a project that I was working on in Ember. So that's kind of how we knew each other. So we're getting excited about this React thing. He kind of had this proof of concept for a router, which at the time there was no router in React. So we were like, maybe that's something we need, right? So we start working on this router together. And lo and behold, like we start kind of tweeting about it. And then people are like, hey, React finally has a router that like, so we can actually build like a real app in React, right? It's not just like this one view anymore. Like I could feasibly build an entire application in React. And so React started taking off like crazy. And people started using the router. And so we kind of had this thing on our hands that was like taken off. And at the same time, we were working full-time jobs. We were working nights and weekends to like try and maintain this thing.
Hadn't even shipped anything to production with the router yet, but it was like already.
It was taken off, right? Like kind of like JavaScript itself, right? Like JavaScript itself got standardized way before it was actually ready to like be a real language. So that's kind of how good ideas go, lots of times. So we quit our jobs, we started this company, we shipped the router, and the whole time we were getting kind of requirements coming in from a lot of different people, right? I need to render the routes on the server. I need to do data fetching in my routes. How do I do that? At the same time, I need to do like animated transitions between my routes. Like when the URL changes, I want to fade out this one page and fade in the next page.
I don't want to have to load all my routes up front.
Yeah, I want to load all my routes up front. I don't want to load all my routes up front. I want to like split my code so I can sort of gradually load my site as it goes.
I want a hot module replace my routes.
So we had all these requirements.
I want to use my routes with Redux.
We were literally like, we had just discovered React, and all of a sudden it was like, everybody's asking us like, how do we do all this stuff? We're like, I don't know, maybe
I've never server rendered.
Yeah.
Have you?
I don't know. Slap some API on there. There we go. That works.
I got it to render on the server. Ship it.
That was literally like how it went, right? And everybody was like, yes, this is it. This is the thing. And we're like, yeah, it's the thing.
It's that thing.
Yeah. And then like every time we would make a change that like broke something, people were like, you really should have thought harder before you made that API. Because I wrote my whole app around that thing, and now you just removed it, and I'm so fatigued with these changes. And we're like,
let me tell you about
sorry,
Semper.
Like, in case you didn't notice, we're driving a car here with like 2 flat tires, and the hood just flew up in front of the windshield. We have no clue what's going on anymore. So we're like trying to hold this thing together, but like it's a little crazy. So anyway, so the router kind of kept going like this. Cue tweet from Dan Abramov.
Which one?
First one where he's like, React. He's like, React team didn't really like.
Oh, I didn't have that one.
Oh, you didn't have that one up?
No, let me find that one.
I thought I gave it to you. Oh, jeez.
It's all right. I can use fine. React team. Team? What did it say? Give me a word.
Yeah, I gotta find it.
V4. No?
I guess.
Oh, I gotta be in tweets and replies. I'll find it. Here we go. All right.
Yeah, that's not it. You were in like Coptic there for a second.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah, there it is. So he goes, actually, to be honest, this is like the big dirty secret, right? Shh. Nobody on the React team actually liked React Router before V4, which is the one that we just shipped like yesterday.
Guess what?
To be honest,
nobody on the React Router team
liked React Router. Every time I went to use it, I was kind of like, oh, I think I could probably just use something else. And Ryan's like, why don't you use the router? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like crazy. And I kind of don't have that many routes. So I think I'll just kind of use this little history library that I wrote, and it'll be fine. But big people, big clients were using the router, and they were building their businesses on it. They were building serious businesses on it. So we're like, okay, let's maintain this thing. Let's get serious about it. And we started thinking about it. The more we started thinking about it, the more we started feeling like we were back in that weird little land where we were like fighting with our parent environment, right? So when I was writing Mustache, I'm fighting with JavaScript. I was inventing my own programming language. What if I reverse the paradigm? What if I just flip everything on its head and put my declarative code inside my imperative code? Well, now it feels great. And so everything that we love about JavaScript, we get to use in our React code. And when somebody invents the new crazy thing, the generators or whatever, they're going to get to use that in React. Or when somebody comes out with that new NPM module that you really want to use, you get to use that in your React app. So React Router version 4 is all about how Ryan and I actually finally learned React.
Took us a little while teaching it.
It did. No, you say that like you're laughing. It did. Like there's so much stuff there to React. It's subtle, but it's important. It's like when you get these principles, you see certain patterns start to emerge, and you're like, oh yeah, I think that's actually more powerful than this other thing over here. It's more flexible, so I can use that instead of using this, right? And we've learned over the years, over 2 years now of using React, how to actually work with React instead of fighting with it all the time. So let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about like that. Let's just take something really, really simple like rendering, for example. So how many people in here currently use React Router, by the way? Okay. So React Router, you'll know that the current version, version 2, we have these elements that you can use, or sorry, these functions that you can pass to your router as props, right? Create element and render, these props, right? These are functions that essentially give you control over how the router is rendering stuff, right? So if you're and the reason we have those props is because some people told us things like, oh, hey, I need to do animation, right? I'm integrating with relay. I need to be able to create that element within the context of my relay thing, the context.
Relay root container.
The relay root container, right? So we're like, okay, so we're creating elements for people. We're doing the rendering for them. So we need to give them these hooks into like when we actually call the create element, right? So we'll add some API for that, right? We'll give you some more API that lets you control the rendering of your components. So this is actually us.
That's better.
Yeah.
Actually, so I had like a screen share with Joffer about
Yeah.
Valcore, and he's like, hey, how do I do this? And I was like, use the create element thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a great example, actually, of us like duplicating something that React already does really well, which is rendering elements.
Even has the same name.
Yep. We took the names. We're like, we'll call it create element.
Since we took this away from you, we had to give it back.
Exactly. So that's an example of us kind of fighting with React, right? We took something from you, now we have to kind of give it back. Let's talk about the life cycle, right? So in your React components, you have this really, really cool, amazingly, incredibly useful thing called the life cycle, right? Component will mount, component did mount, component will receive props, component did update, component will unmount. Those are kind of the 5 core methods that we use all the time in Friends. So when we were thinking about routing, we were like, well, every other router has this like static route config thing, right? So we started there and we said, we'll give you this static route config, and then people were like, well, what if I want to call a function when I get into that route, when that component mounts? And so we're like, maybe we could have an onEnter hook, right?
Ember's router had that.
Yeah, it does.
Before model.
It sounds like a great way to go, right? Especially because that was our initial inspiration for making the router. So let's put an onEnter hook, and then, you know, just for good measure, we should probably have an onLeave hook in case they need to sort of like clean up something that happens when they leave the route. And then about 6 months ago, somebody merged this onChange hook. And when they did that, I was just like, what are we even doing anymore? Like we have what the crap have we done?
Effing what the crap have we done? Function.
It should be what the effing crap have we done? We have essentially, we've reinvented the life cycle now, right? Outside of React, right? Outside of React, we reinvented the life cycle for you. It's like me and Mustache reinventing for loops for people. So we were fighting with React there too, right? We gave you these hooks, but really, if we were in the React component lifecycle, like we could just use those. Those are great hooks. Everybody already knows how to use those. Why are we inventing hooks?
And they're literally the same.
The exact same hooks. onEnter,
Same time.
onLeave, onChange is your component will receive props. Your component did update, right? So that we're fighting with the life cycle.
There's one big problem with that too. Is once you're in here, there's no way to like say, like, set state, I'm loading. You know, like you're not in the life cycle.
At one point, remember we were going to pass in a set state function?
Yeah.
Because we're like, they're going to need to set state in here. So like maybe we'll just give them a set state function. Then
we're going to take stuff away from you, but we promise we'll give it back.
We're laughing at this API, but like this was real API that we were like gonna ship.
This is the current master.
We can feel that people need to do this, but like, it feels so weird.
Yeah, so no way to indicate, oh, I'm doing something asynchronous here. Like your UI was just paused, or you had to step out of React completely and have some sort of publisher, subscriber, some store somewhere to actually use these hooks and give the user any sort of feedback.
Totally. Let's talk about nesting. So nesting has actually been a pretty core feature of our router, right? Nested, if you've read anything about the router, you probably read something like nested routes equals nested views, right? The way that you nest your routes corresponds with the way that you nest views on the page. It's just boxes inside boxes inside boxes, right? This was actually kind of the core piece of inspiration that we got from Ember's router, which I think was really, really important. Most server-side routers, you'll see they'll use things like partials and then partials inside partials, et cetera, because they're kind of trying to get that. What they really want is nesting, right? Because every web page is just this nested set of views. And so I think one of the core things that they identified was nested routes equals nested views. You think about your component's render method, like how do you nest stuff? You just put children, right? Like you've already got nesting in React, in JSX. You've got a beautiful nesting model in the DOM. You just render a component and then give it some children and give that one some children. I mean, you can have all the nesting you want. So how did we duplicate this piece of what React was already doing so beautifully? That was in our static route config. We said, well, you can have nested routes. So if you have nested routes, And since we're doing the rendering for you, remember we already talked about that, how we are the ones doing create element, we're the ones doing render. Since we're the ones doing rendering for you, well, we'll also have to give you a way to nest the stuff that we render. So if you nest your routes, then we'll nest the stuff when we render it, and we'll give you the right children, right? It's just another way of how we were fighting React. What if I need to do nesting in special ways? What if, for example, I've got like two different routes that I want to render at the same URL? What if I've got like a main page over here and I've got like a sidebar over here, right? A lot of people design websites like this, right? The URL changes and I want to update both of them. I want a new kind of sub-navigation and I want the main page to change as well. We kind of had to invent API for that too. So you could give, instead of just giving your route one component.
I can never even remember how to do this one.
You could give it an array of components. You could give it an array. It's like an array.
Yeah, it's right. It's an object. So then it'd be like.
Yeah, it's a name. The sidebar component is that thing, and then the main component is the other thing. So we actually invented we're like, it's not sufficient just to have nesting. At any level of the nesting, they might want to have like multiple things to render. So we should actually probably give them an API for that too. And then we'll give them these keys, and then they can pull it out later in their render function when they actually get there, right? I hope they can kind of see all these different ways we were like duplicating stuff that React literally already gives you.
And like, what the heck happens here? This user, when it gets nested below, you could render in the side or the main down here in this.
Right.
So weird.
Let's talk about code loading, right? So a lot of people want to do code loading. A lot of people want to do, truth is, we're building some pretty big apps. You don't want everything defined up front. In fact, this was a requirement that we got from Facebook themselves, who were like, hey, in order for us to use a router, we've got these bundles that we ship to the client. And a hard requirement about a new release is that we don't actually ship any more code in that initial payload when we're working on features way down in the app, right? So we don't want to have to as we're working on the new newsfeed thing, I'm not adding new code to the initial bundle that I ship. So because we're the ones controlling how your route config looked and what components were in your route config, and we were the ones controlling rendering, we also had to give you an API for doing code loading, right? So we had this API, and we still do in version 2, called getComponent or getComponents, because we've already talked about how we had to give you more API to load multiple components in a route. Also getChildRoutes, which was how you would asynchronously load your routes, right? And then we all argued on GitHub about, well, how could we make this more efficient from getChildRoutes? Maybe we could do it in one call. Maybe we could do it in multiple calls. So we had to give you API for doing things like code loading. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about hot module reloading. You guys are like, okay, we get it. We get it. Hot module reloading. Who's doing hot module reloading? HMR, right? I think Dan opened an issue on it's got to be like one of the super early ones, like less than a year into the router, where he's like,
I've never realized that HMR is like that store too. Isn't it? Oh, H&M. Sorry, never mind. I didn't go shopping.
Giving a presentation.
Wearing free T-shirts.
That's what you're thinking about.
Oh, sorry.
We actually don't currently have an answer in React Router 2 for doing hot module reloading. It's an issue that's been open for like a year and a half, and we're like looking at it thinking like, we're still not sure how to do that, right? Because we take your routes up front, we parse them all, and then if you want to introduce a new route into your app and hot module reload it into the page, and preserve everything that's still running, we're going to have to take that new route config and parse it, and then somehow figure out that the current page that is running still matches those routes that we've already parsed. It's a complex problem. It's not an easy one to solve. How did we solve this? All these ways that we're fighting with React. We're just like, what if the router was just components? What if we built a router and we got rid of this idea entirely of routes? If you don't have routes, what if you just have components? Because components is an API that everybody understands. If I tell you just render this element, you get it instantly. In fact, for those of you who have already used React Router, you're going to look at version 4 and you're going to be like, that's kind of boring. because you're going to understand it instantly.
If you haven't used React Router before, you're going to see V4 and be like, huh?
Oh, if you haven't.
Yeah.
If you have, you're going to be like, oh crap, they changed everything again.
First you'll think that.
And then you'll think, well, this is kind of how I should have been doing it all the time.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see what we mean by this. Removing routes entirely. What are we even talking about? Let's check out the basic example. So Ryan actually spent a ton of time on this. Oh, this is a great tweet. Mark Dalgleish. React Router has taken on new meaning. Instead of being a router for React, it's showing what a truly React router, a truly React-like router looks like. This was after he took a look at version 4. In React Router, the emphasis is no longer on the router, but on React. So the router is just a React component. We're actually working with React. All the components that we ship are regular React components. You no longer have these like pseudo route components that are not actually real components that get rendered into the page, things like that. So let's take a look at what this looks like. I don't want to stand in front of the code here. So this is just a totally basic example. So you import your router. We've still got a link. You'll recognize that from our current API. And then we've got this new component called match, right? And notice match is not something that's like in your route config. A match is something that we're actually rendering. Match is in our render function right here.
Yeah, we used to take those routes and just strip the props and create our own little object of here are what the routes are.
Route config.
But here we actually render this thing.
So in a lot of cases, actually the migration, like if you're just having a very basic React Router use case, React Router 2, in lots of cases, you can upgrade to React Router 4 pretty simply by taking that route config, putting it in some other component's render method, changing the word route from route to match, and path to pattern, and everything actually should work pretty well. Except now we're in the component lifecycle. So think about some of those use cases that we had, right? What about things like nesting? How would I solve nesting if I just had a real match component?
You just use it.
You just use it. You just do it, right?
Thank you.
He's like, I don't even know why you're asking me this question.
Yeah.
I just put a component inside the match component. This is the dumbest presentation. What time is it? I'm out of here. Right?
I was giving a preview. Oh shoot, I'm in the master branch right now. I'm sorry, I blew it.
I really need to get a more capable assistant.
I was doing a workshop, and they wanted to get a preview of it, and I started going through it. And about 20 minutes in, I was looking.
People are like yawning in the backseat. It's like you.
I'm like, is everybody bored in here? Like honestly, raise your hand if you're a little bit bored. And they started raising their hands, and I was like, that means we did our job with this router.
You know how when you see like an amazing basketball player like Steph Curry just like pop a three and you're like, I can do that.
All right, so here we go.
We've got what we're talking about here with the router.
So this is our basic example. It's the top level component. When we match topics, we'll render that topics for you if you like. And then down here in topics, we're going to pass you the path name that matched up to topics. So back in the parent one, how far did we match there? We're going to pass that to you here. And now we can link deeper, so we get relative links for free with just normal React.
Which is something people have been asking about for a long time. How can I get relative links? You're like, well, what if we just had components?
And then to nest, we just render some more matches right there.
It really is pretty simple. Let's show them a little more complex example. Let's show them the, we got this new component, which is really cool, called miss. Match and miss. So the idea with a miss is we previously had this API for like nothing matched, right? You would have all your route config, and then your very last route would be path equals star, right? If nothing else matches, I want you to render this thing, right? So we have this component, well, miss, right? So if nothing else, if none of the siblings of matched, right? Match and miss are like siblings. They live in the same context. They don't actually have to be direct siblings, they can live anywhere in the same context. But if none of those matches match, well, then the miss will render.
A year ago, we did not know, like, we wouldn't have known how to implement that.
No, exactly.
Like,
You're like, why is the API changing? It's like, because I literally didn't know how to do that, but like, now I do. Because we know how to do that.
go home and think about that one.
Why didn't you do that before you knew how to do it?
Or come to our advanced workshop in San Francisco in November, and we'll teach you how for
This is not a marketing spiel.
Oh, sorry.
People don't care. All right. Let's talk about auth, the auth example. There's a tweet that I love. So we actually refactored out the router into a couple of different pieces. There's a history package, there's a React history package, and there's the React router package. Don't worry, those previous two are just deps. You don't have to know a darn thing about them. You don't even have to know they exist. But one of the things that I did was I kind of leaked that I was working on this React history package a while back. And Forbes, he's a friend of mine who works at Facebook, he's like, WTF, you have an imperative API that you call by rendering a push component? How many people saw the React history API or have seen the React history API, right? Like, I love that we can still get a reaction like this from somebody, right? I think the React team experienced a lot of like the same, just like, what are you doing when you're putting that JSX stuff in your JavaScript? Let's see somebody else who had, well, so let's kind of see like, what is he talking about, right? We're doing imperative work by rendering components. Let's take a look. So we've got this example, auth, redirects. So we've got this example where we've got, something very common that you need to do when you're building an app is you need to do auth. You've got some public page, and then you've got a private, protected page that you can only look at when you're signed in, right? When you think about these match components, the reality is they are just components, right? They are just elements, okay? So I can compose them like I can compose elements. So what if I wanted to create a special kind of match that when you weren't authenticated, it would just redirect you somewhere? And I wanted to do that like in JSX, right? I just wanted to like compose these things together. So we could create a match when authorized component, right? All it's going to do is wrap match. And it's going to check this little auth variable. Try and ignore Ryan's crazy ternaries. But no, I like them actually. They'll grow on you. So if we're authenticated, go ahead and render the component. Otherwise, let's render a redirect. What does that even mean? To render a redirect? What do you think it means? To redirect to the page. Like you go somewhere else, right? You redirect to the URL, right? So this is what Forbes was kind of upset about, right? He's like, why are you doing imperative stuff by rendering components? What does Dan have to say about it?
So check it out. When we mount.
Oh yeah, when we mount.
Get the heck out of here.
Go ahead and do the redirect.
It doesn't like existing.
I mean, and this code is like super simple. Like the router code is really, really simple now. So check out what Dan said when he saw it. He's like, this is awesome, right? Because now I no longer have to have like this imperative API. I can read exactly what's going on when I just read my render method.
And when it's time to do a redirect, I use whatever data flow paradigm I like. State, Redux, MobX. I guess a 5.4 thing could come in and be like, hey, what's up, redirect? I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, we don't prescribe to you any of that.
Just render this component and things will work.
Let's talk about the recursive paths. Pop up the tweet from Jason. He's like, this is the coolest tweet I've seen in a long time. For those of you who don't know Jason Miller, he's the inventor of Preact, which is kind of like this React spin-off, super smart guy, really nice, really talented. And he saw the docs that we wrote, and he was like, that's cool. I've never actually seen a router do that. I've never actually seen a router do this before.
Hey, watch the URL.
What are we even talking about here?
Watch the URL in the UI.
Do you ever stop? Like, you're talk about infinitely nesting, right? Infinitely scrolling. This you can literally like infinitely nest a recursive path. Think about like a mobile.
That's it. That's the whole code right there. That's the app.
Think about a mobile navigation paradigm, right? Think about Twitter, right? I'm on the Twitter app. I tap into somebody's tweet. I tap into the profile. And I tap into somebody who replied from them. Then I tap into their profile. Then I tap into something else, right? Like I could, in theory, I could like go pretty deep into that path, right? I could go pretty deep down that rabbit hole. How am I going to describe that with a static route config?
Maybe that's why Twitter.com just opens everything in modals.
Indeed. That's another meditation for later tonight. What if I'm just using components? What is that going to look like? Up and up. So router, I'm going to render person. Okay. What does person render? A match.
A link to their friends.
A link to their friends, and then a match that also renders a person. Okay, what does a person render? A link to their friends, and a match that also renders a person. Okay, what does a person render? A link to their friends, and a match that also renders a... You get it? Right? Like, if we're just using components, we can recurse infinitely without ever, like... Without even thinking about it, without even breaking a sweat, right?
We pass you in the path name.
People are walking
match.
out. This is so boring. I told you. Like this API is like, you'll get it. You'll get it when you use it. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just components, just like any other component.
And that path name comes in, and that's how far we've matched up until this point. And that's why it's so easy to just keep on building URL as you need it. You don't need to statically define it all up front.
So we've got a lot of docs that we want to write about this. We've already written a ton of docs. We're going to keep writing about it. We're going to keep talking about it every time you hear us talking about anything. We get it, okay? We get that it sucks to have an API that changes all the time. Believe it or not, before Ryan and I started our own business where we were like just, talking heads, talking about what we thought were good ideas, we actually worked at real software companies under real pointy-headed managers, and we had real deadlines that we had to hit, shipping real products to real people who paid real money, except for me because I worked at Twitter. And we just shipped everything for free. But Ryan shipped stuff to people who were actually paying real money.
And turned out I could sell some stock options.
Exactly. Exactly.
We also lost real hair.
Some of us more than others, right? So like, we get it. We get that it's a pain. And people are like, oh man, the API is changing again. Like, come on. Truth is, I'm still learning React. Ryan is still learning React. The stuff that we're giving you in version 4 is stuff that we literally did not know how to do a year ago, but it's the API that we always wanted. We don't actually give you any API with this release. We give you components. We give you match. We give you miss. We give you link. We give you a router component. That's it. A redirect component.
Yeah, redirect.
That's it. So the short of the story is we were fighting React a lot. We're done with doing that. You can bring whatever paradigm you want. You can bring your Redux. You can bring your Falcor. You can bring whatever stuff that you're doing with your current React app. And React Router will just work because it's just components. This next tweet actually really made my night the other night. So Sebastian Markvage, how many people know who Sebastian is? He's kind of like dear leader if you are doing React. He's the guy who like, he's kind of at the center of the React core team, and he kind of spends a lot of time thinking about and working on React. Right now he's working on the next version of the React reconciler. He saw what we were doing in V4 last night, and he said, I'm really excited about React Router. He said, I'm excited because this is one of those evolutions that are aha moments. This is clearly in the direction that it should be done. So we really appreciate his support. We really appreciate your support. Obviously, we're here if you have any questions about the router or what it's going to be like to migrate to it. Ryan did briefly mention we are doing an advanced React training at Uber, actually, in October up in San Francisco. Is that right?
Yeah, October or November. So.
October, November. It's coming up. We would love to see you at our advanced React training. We're going to talk about routing. We're going to talk about a lot of kind of stuff that we learned that helped us build the router. So we'd love to see you there next month or November. Keep an eye on reacttraining.com. I'm M. Jackson. He's Ryan Florence on Twitter. Thank you very much.